CrimeNet was hanging on by a thread. Locke and the crew had held it together, but minus Bain, it was without a leader or a purpose. If Duke couldn't decipher the intended use for the medallion they'd stolen from Brooklyn Bank, all would likely be lost. On the horizon, Beyond Yesterday was preparing. This wasn't a war brewing for the contents of a vault, for bullion or diamonds. This was a war far more crucial to mankind than even the Payday gang could comprehend. You see, the crew was about to play spoiler. Unlikely heroes when angels, demons and Nephilim, not banks, guns and cops, became the focus of our story. This is the story of Payday. As the year rolled over to 2018, the Payday gang was still none the wiser of Bain's location. There were murmurs amongst the group that he'd been killed back in DC, and they were following the instructions of a dead man. Locke was a capable organiser, but he wasn't a leader. Without an ideology, without a purpose, and without the protection Bain's global surveillance offered, the Payday gang's time was limited. Finally though, a lifeline presented itself from the most surprising of locations. Commissioner Garrett's FBI files would shed light on what had transpired, and what was to come. First, thanks to the forensic analysis taking place on Bain's headquarters, the crew were able to see a final message from Bain. Sergeant Brian Painter, the man tasked with the special analysis operations within the Payday task force, would soon become the man Garrett trusted with the organization's final roll of the dice. As public support began to turn against the task force, funded by the taxpayers' dollar to such an extent, at this point, it may have been cheaper just to let the Payday gang steal the public's cash. In any case, Painter's correspondence with Garrett had this image attached. Whilst the cops were none the wiser, the Payday gang had Duke, who was well versed in the Hebrew required to understand Bain's message. Written at the top of the page was Nebuchadnezzar. On the figure's forehead was Watcher, and finally hidden on his chest, Nephilim. Nebuchadnezzar II was a pivotal figure in Babylonian history, a great king linked to the tales of the Watchers, a group described in the biblical first book of Enoch as fallen angels, cast down after being tempted by the beauty of human women, breaking their vow to silently watch, and giving rise to an inhuman offspring, the Nephilim, or fallen giants. What the hell could all of this mean? Was Bain trying to tell the crew that angels and demons were real? Maybe he was. However, to Duke, this was a more grounded message. From what he'd understood so far, Bain was considered a watcher. Nebuchadnezzar II was known to be the architect of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The account, Sage Niwa, the Hanging Garden, was the one who'd foreshadowed Bain's disappearance in an email to Garrett. Bain was telling the crew who had taken him. Beyond Yesterday had to be dealt with. As if proof of Duke's theory, soon after the same email account sent Garrett another message, and installed a new piece of software to the FBI terminal. The MUDUTU was a cipher solver, designed to encrypt their future correspondences with the task force leader, likely to keep the information away from prying eyes. Again, Duke's knowledge of ancient linguistics and symbolism was essential. It was meant to be read Mudutu, meaning knowledge when translated from Akkadian. By using the application with the correct numerical code block, the corresponding Beyond Yesterday messages could be read, both by Garrett and the Payday gang. From the first message, Duke solved the code block thanks to his Sumerian knowledge. 35,990 was the answer. Then, inputting the coded message, it read,
Commissioner Garrett, you are no doubt aware by now that our organization has taken the liberty of locating and removing the individual known as Bain from the criminal underworld. We are sympathetic to your frustration in not being able to bring him to justice, and thus offer you a proposal. There is a certain individual in Washington, D.C. who is in possession of an item that belongs to us, and we would like that item returned. The individual in question happens to be a person of great means, as well as a member of the United States Congress, though not a very honourable one. As such, he has surrounded himself with quite stringent security, and it would be difficult for even our organisation to reach him and conduct a thorough search of his offices to recover it. You, however, could do so, if you be willing to set aside your oath of allegiance and strict adherence to the law in this one instance, for your perceived greater good. We are willing to aid you in your charge of ending crime net, provided you facilitate the return of our item. Tomorrow, at 6:30 a.m, we will have an associate waiting at the donut shop that is closest to your office. If you are interested, meet him there, and you will be provided with more details.
It was immediately obvious who Beyond Yesterday were after. Senator Simmons, the Elephant, another associate of CrimeNet. Of course he was wrapped up in all of this. It was risky to move on the Elephant first. The gang didn't know what angle he was playing now. Duke demanded his crewmates hold steady as he and Locke were working on their next move. In the meantime, it was obvious what Garrett's decision would be in all of this. He was willing to do anything to see the end of his nemesis, within the realms of legality or not. A month later, he sent one of the Beyond Yesterday email addresses his own coded message. This time, the key was even more convoluted. 9192631760. I met your man. The materials he supplied are being looked at to confirm they will hold up to legal scrutiny. To be clear, I have suspected he is dirty for some time, so despite the manufactured nature of the evidence you have provided, as well as any intent you may have to compromise my ethics for nefarious reasons, you should know that I will lose no sleep over this, illicit or not. Locking him up will be in the interest of serving the greater good. Therefore, provided this item you claim ownership of is not overtly dangerous or has a highly illegal status, I will consent to release it to you in exchange for the individual known as Bain. I am, however, concerned regarding the reaction of your representative when I asked him about the current health status of the prisoner. Justice will be served either way. It matters little to me, but it would have been preferable for him to stand trial. Once you confirm receipt of this message, I will begin preparations to apprehend the congressman. This was all the crew needed to hear. Bain was alive, a prisoner of Beyond Tomorrow. Whatever they were after, if the Payday gang got their hands on it first, they'd be able to draw Beyond Tomorrow out of hiding. Oh, and now, the cipher symbol's message was changed. It read, Kataru, meaning alliance. It was time for Beyond Tomorrow to show their hand, for up until now, they had been using a code name. In their next response to Garrett, they gave Duke just what he'd been waiting for. This message was hidden under 6 layers of complex riddles and code, and was certainly not one intended for the gang to read, at least not in time for them to do anything about it. Unfortunately for this group, they underestimated Duke. He decrypted the final message to simply read,
Then we are in agreement, Mr. Garrett. The Kataru are pleased that Bain's condition is not of paramount importance to you. On the day after you have made the arrest, our representative will again meet you at the same hour in the same donut shop to discuss when and where the exchange will take place.
The Kataru was this group's true identity, important information Duke had been hanging on to. After receiving this message, Garrett proceeded with the plan against the Elephant. It was clear that McKendrick didn't take too well to his old political ally being publicly arrested, but Garrett no longer cared for mayoral backing. It was the Kataru who'd give him what he wanted most. Operation Karamojo saw the anti-Payday task force launch a sting operation on Simmons' political office, arresting the admittedly corrupt politician on suspicion of money laundering, one of the few crimes he didn't truly commit. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to hold him for long, but in the raid on his house, they acquired whatever it was the Kataru were after, as well as some old documents which provided the fuel to force Duke's hand, revealing his place in all of this madness. Sent to the forensics team and intercepted by the Payday gang's listening device, what they found in the Elephant's possession was a letter sent by one August Lindenhurst.
There was a regent in the late 19th century named Lindenhurst, a close friend of my grandfather who was entrusted with all his secrets. Lindenhurst was murdered, probably by another regent, but not before hiding the medallion.
Unless Duke was some sort of time traveller, it was clear that the Lindenhursts were at the forefront of protecting the knowledge of whatever this artifact, Baldwin's Lament, was. The letter went on to discuss the Kings, the Watchers, and painted a more detailed picture of what the Kataru were all about. The Hyle Triangle, Holy Trinities, Cagliostro, and the Alchemists. What's most notable was that the symbols and iconography that appeared on this letter mirrored those the Kataru often used in their own messages to Garrett. With his Kataru family ties now self-evident, Duke was forced to share what he knew with his crewmates, and suspicions started to grow amongst the gang that he was a double agent for the Kataru. He was quick to make it clear that he was loyal to Bain, and had been since first working with the criminal mastermind on a job back in the 90s. The two shared a common interest in all things ancient and criminal. Duke due to his family history with the Lament, and Bain out of a fascination for how these supposed artifacts could change the world. Duke had been unwilling to share this information in the past out of respect for Bain's request to avoid involving his crew in the madness of the secret. He went on to explain that the Kataru hadn't always been hell-bent on ruling from the shadows, but were originally a benevolent organisation, tasked with maintaining knowledge of these ancient secrets and traditions, but keeping them out of the wrong hands. His grandfather had been associated with the Kataru as its intentions wavered, and in recent years, Duke recalled its membership had been driven to covet that which it was meant to protect, much like the Watchers from the Old Testament story. As a result, the organisation had fallen from grace, driven to ruin by a rogue member. Duke understood much of the Kataru's ways and methods, but he still didn't know who had pushed them down this dark path.
A few thousand years ago, 3 great kings got together, decided to rule the world, and made a pact. They called themselves Kataru, which kind of translates as alliance. Illuminati, Freemasons, enthusiastic amateurs in comparison. Legends say they acquired a magical artifact of some kind, if you believe in that sort of thing. And somehow, they seem to be behind all this. When my father passed, I inherited all of my grandfather's notes and research. Wasn't long after that I came into contact with Bain.
Duke was telling the truth. His sincere allegiance to Bain and the Payday gang was further proven when Jacket found a loose cassette tape in his meticulously kept collection.
Hey gang, sorry to get all dramatic on you, but looks like they got me and you gotta assume I'm dead. Should have paid more attention in Vegas. Locke has probably filled you in on some things by now. I didn't want to keep you in the dark about this secret society crap, but there was a lot I didn't know. If we played it right, this would have been the end all. To give us everything we ever wanted and keep the cops off our asses for good. I figured things were gonna get easier when Duke came in to help with the missing Lindenhurst pages of Cagliostro's book and this Watcher business. After all, his family has been knee-deep in this stuff from the start, but this is bigger than us. A lot bigger. So you gotta make a choice. Either retire to an island somewhere, let the world sort itself out, and hope this shit doesn't follow you. Or keep going. Help Locke finish what I started. Find Baldwin's lament. Remember guys, whatever happens, trust your partners. And Jacket, don't you go hogging this tape. It's not just for you.
This was all Dallas needed to hear. It was obvious Duke was following through with Bain's wishes. This galvanised his and the gang's resolve to get Bain back and finish what he had started. They were going to solve the secret. First though, they'd have to draw the Kataru out of hiding, and now, thanks to the FBI files, they had access to just what they'd need. With the elephant still in police custody and his possessions being held as evidence, the gang would have the perfect bait if they could secure whatever the Kataru was seeking from the elephant. This meant, not for the first time, a trip to the FBI headquarters was in order, and time was of the essence. The world as it was, and without Bain to lead the operation, it was decided that breaking feds would be completed silently. Also, given he was their eyes, ears, and only connection to the Kataru, Garrett had to be left unharmed. Failure here would be the end of things for the Payday project, so only the finest in the crew stepped up to take on the headquarters, silently entering through a skylight on the uppermost floor of the sector. There must have been over 30 guards and cops stationed there even this late in the evening, but a brewing storm muffled their footsteps and quietened their entrance. Locke was pulling all the strings he could to assist. His remaining contact in the FBI made access to the task force officers easier by moving the security access laptop to one of the side rooms, giving the crew all they needed to hack their way through the new security protocol. Once inside in that familiar hall, the only goal was to find Garrett's office. Locke had been tipped off that whatever it was he was handing over to the Kataru, it was now in his possession, not in the evidence lockers. Sliding between patrols, the crew found Garrett making a phone call. Aware who that may have been on the other end of the phone, they acted quickly, pulling the power on the commissioner's office and drawing him out. They overrode the lock on his office door and slipped in as he left, searching for any sign of the elephant's relic. Behind a bookshelf was a safe, and by trying the 4-digit passcodes plastered around the office, they brute forced their way in. What they found inside was familiar. A great gold coffer, not identical, but incredibly similar to the one they'd taken from the bowels of the Golden Grin. Associations came flooding in, the eye of Providence. They should have known. Emblazoned on this coffer was another symbol. This one was known as the Fiat Lux. Let there be light. In any case, Duke would have more time to analyse the box once they were out of the lion's den. With Garrett on his way back to the office, the crew quickly fled, taking one of the elevators down to the archives, where Twitch was waiting to blow the crew out of the building and drive them back to the safe house. In the wake of this heist, another high-profile hit on the FBI, rumours of deep state involvement had made their way into online conspiracy circles. These theorists give us lore enthusiasts a unique understanding of just how perfect the gang's timing was. Garrett was about to deliver the elephant's coffer right as the crew took it from under his nose. From this point on, we see a change in Garrett. He stopped personally tending to the Payday case files. This wasn't about taking down CrimeNet with a good old-fashioned police investigation anymore. The Kataru were his only option, and now the Kataru were not best pleased. Their next intercepted correspondence was a thinly veiled threat.
Mr. Garrett, we would have thought you more intelligent than to conclude that not answering our last attempts at telephone communication would result in a positive outcome for anyone. Suffice it to say, you do not appear to fully realise whom or what you are dealing with. The truth of the matter is that if you remain loyal, fate may yet gift you the prize you seek and hinder you from falling into Lamhu. Regardless of recent happenings, something is now in motion that cannot be ended.
The gang were hardly concerned for Garrett's sake. The something that was on its way right now was a storm at the Kataru's front door, or more specifically, at the gates of a pivotal pawn of the Kataru's ambition all this time, known to CrimeNet since their trip to the slaughterhouse years prior. Locke had been investigating leads on the Kataru and where he might recover the lockbox the crew stole from the dentist in 2015. Of course, his old organisation seemed the perfect place to start. But the more he dug into Murky Water's past, the more connections he began to find to the Kataru. Suddenly it dawned on him where he'd seen the Kataru's symbology before. Henry's Rock, the largest Murky Water storage facility hidden away in the Nevada wastes. They were no mercenaries. They were a branch of artifact hunters. He'd been working for the pawns of the Kataru without ever knowing it. Upon this sudden realization, Locke again hacked the Murky Water network, finding facility camera footage to confirm his suspicions about the rock. Sure enough, the coffers were there, including the one they'd taken from the Golden Grin. Either the dentist was selling to Murky Water, or he was the trusted party who betrayed Bain. No matter, once Locke knew for certain that the risk was worthwhile, he called in all remaining favours he was owed within his old company to forge a path to the answers. Getting 4 crates and a few heisting supplies through the compound gates was all he could muster, but it was enough for Dallas to go ahead with the plan. Getting out of the facility was going to be the real challenge. Fortunately, Jiro was willing to lend his expertise to the crew for this heist. Experience was something they'd need to formulate a way out of the military-grade compound. But in truth, for Jiro, he was just acting on a hunch. He'd seen the emails, the names, Kataru written in katakana. His countrymen were involved somehow. He sensed it. All he could do was pray it wasn't as he feared. Anyway, a cramped container entrance was familiar to the gang, springing their ambush at initial inspection. From there, the 4 had to work their way through Henry's Rock the hard way, first by overriding the lockdown set off upon their apprehension, then by hacking into the Murky Water mainframe and gaining access to their labs and experiments, at the heart of which lay the coffers. There were 4 rooms to consider: a biolab, an archaeological research room, a weapons lab, and a digital R&D station. From the facility footage Locke had combed through, he'd learnt a lot. Murky Water had hired scientists to investigate the myths and legends of the ancient Kataru. Locke had seen where they were stored, but each room had their own mysteries worth analysing. A great mummified corpse was held in stasis in the biolab, identical to the one preserved and on display in the McKendrick Museum. I guess it was no hoax, as the gang had assumed. This body matched the photos taken at the Sumerian dig sites, with its alien elongated skull. This was a Nephilim, long since dead, but once very much alive. They were part of the power which the Kataru were trying to harness, and one of the many secrets they were sworn to protect, not experiment on. At the very least, for the gang it was proof that some of this secret insanity had to be real. Within the weapons lab was state-of-the-art technology the Murkies had been developing for use of the Kataru. A laser weapon which could degrade layers of thick concrete in seconds, as well as the same state-of-the-art turret the gang had stolen from the Gensec freight train all those years ago. Just how deeply rooted in CrimeNet's affairs had the Kataru been in the past? Did this mean Gensec were also pawns of the group? The final research room, the archaeology lab, left them with the most questions. Recurring artifacts were up for analysis, some Sumerian, others Mesopotamian or Mayan, all tied to the mythos of the Kataru. The most shocking was that which held the coffer, a great gold chest with 3 hidden release buttons. After pressing all 3, it opened up further. Underneath were 4 masks. 4 clown masks that looked thousands of years old. But surely that was impossible, when the masks were exactly those worn by Dallas, Chains, Wolf, and Houston. Could it be that cycles of heisters had gone before them, wearing those same masks? Surely not. Maybe Bain had just got the design from one of his old manuscripts. Whilst the contents of the rooms helped grow an understanding of what was happening here, it was the arcs that they were truly after. After dragging the dentist's artifact back to the conveyor belt leading to the entrance, they located a third and final arc, this one displaying another cosmological symbol, the reflected diamond. The meaning of these symbols were noted by Duke, using a great Kataru triangle in the centre of the compound for reference. But for now, this knowledge would be useless without bringing the 3 arcs together. So, with the artifacts in tow, the gang had all they'd need to draw the Kataru out of the shadows. But first, they'd need to escape Nevada. An aerial escape, courtesy of Bile from the entrance to the compound, was their only option, dangerous as it may be. But on their way out, a shutter opened up in the main hall. Out of the gloom stepped forward a figure. Jiro's deepest fears were realised. In front of the heisters, protected by bulletproof glass, stood the acting leader of Murky Water, Jiro's son, Kento. The rest of the crew hardly noticed the Yakuza's shock, captivated themselves by the monitor behind him. On that monitor, a live feed of 2 figures was being streamed. One sat slumped, bloody and beaten, but face covered. It was Bain. The other was just out of view, but Dallas recognised those rounded glasses in a second. He was the only one who'd actually met the man in person. It was the dentist stood next to Bain. They had been betrayed again, but now at least they knew who to direct all their ire and hatreds towards. Bain was alive, if barely, but it was enough to know. Now Locke had to get them home with the coffers. Fueled by the sight of Bain's brutal torture, as well as Jiro's heartbreaking revelation, they pushed on to the exit, finding the strength they needed to hold off the 2 anti-personnel turrets at the entrance, hacking their activation switches and giving Bile the space to touch down and lift them out of the desert and away from the Murky Water stronghold. This wouldn't be the last they saw of Murky Water. If anything, it was a declaration of war against them, as the anti-Payday task force fell into obscurity and the real fight against the Kataru pawns emerged. In fact, from here on it becomes impossible to trust the validity of the FBI file database, as half of what was being reported was for the benefit of Garrett's superiors, keeping them off his tail whilst he worked with the Kataru. Back in Washington, Jiro sat devastated. To finally find his son after 2 decades in prison and all those years searching, to be at the head of an organisation that had caused his new family so many problems, it was an impossible revelation for him to take. He couldn't bear to turn his back on the gang though. His blood or not, Kento had been groomed from birth for this, and Jiro was a total stranger to him. Now, with a clearly insane secret society vying for control of the world, his choice was simple. Follow his strict code of ethics, aid in destroying Kento and all he'd worked for, if need be. Whilst Jiro weighed up his resolve, Duke was leading an investigation into the coffers they'd recovered, whilst Dallas and Locke discussed their next move against the dentist. If Duke could unlock the secrets of the arcs, the gang would have a great advantage in taking the fight to the Kataru. However, the patience Duke required was running thin amongst his crewmates. They'd seen the footage of Bain. They knew there was no more time for riddles. After sleepless days studying the Kataru triangle for meaning though, it finally came to him. The answer was in the occult symbology of Robert Flood's Heil Triangle, a creationist theory. The 3 realms of Renaissance cosmology were indicated by 3 symbols. The Eye of Providence, representing Heaven's realm, the Fiat Lux in the celestial realm, and the reflected diamond in the physical realm. Attached to each symbol was a pillar of the Kataru's leadership: the King Doctor, the King Elephant, and the King Scribe, each granted a coffer to guard. Within these 3 coffers, it was implied there would be something to aid in the ruling of each realm, the key to Borwin's Lament. All of these were connected by a central symbol, the fleur-de-lis. And where had Duke seen the fleur-de-lis before? Of course, Bain's advice was golden. The artifact they'd recovered from the foundations of the Brooklyn Bank, which Duke now called by its real name, the Medallion of Perseids, was the key. With the medallion in hand, the coffers slid open for Duke. In the first lay obsidian rings. In the second, an obsidian sphere. The third, the scribe's coffer, was empty. Duke assembled the pieces they had, and the rings began to rotate around the orb, which appeared to hold an otherworldly gravitational force. But it was clearly missing a part. Whatever the coffers held wouldn't share its secrets without the scribe's key. This revelation came exactly at the moment the elephant called. He'd been released without charge by the task force and knew just who'd put him in their custody in the first place. Whilst it was obvious the elephant knew far more about the Kataru than he'd ever let on, at this point, the enemy of the gang's enemy was their friend. It just so happened Simmons wanted his own revenge and had the answer to one of the gang's greatest questions. The coffer's stolen contents were in Salem. The Shacklethorne auction beckoned. As ever, thank you very much to my Mean Infamy patrons and above. If you want to join that infamous club to see yourself in the credits or get early exclusive access to my videos, including the story videos, check out my Patreon link below. Remember, the Discord is open to all if you crave some more Payday discussion. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all very soon for the next one.